And that's where a lot of leadership development goes wrong, where people are focused on, I'm going to increase my knowledge, I'm going to increase my skills, but they forget about changing the behavior that has the impact as a result of that.
Welcome back to 40-Minute Mentor, the podcast on a mission to raise aspirations and inspire the next generation of category-defining founders, all in just 40 minutes. After 12 series of 40-Minute Mentor, we thought it was time to get some of our most popular 40-Minute Mentors back on the podcast and see what they've been up to since they last came on the show. For this Where Are They Now episode, we're joined by 40-Minute Mentor turned colleague, Anouk Agussol, founder of Unleashed, an amplified people group business. If you've been a listener for a while, you may remember Anouk's episode from season 9, or have heard more about Unleashed in one of their adverts throughout the past series. Today, we're getting Anouk back on the podcast to tell us a bit more about how Unleashed has evolved since we last spoke, the acquisition by Amplified Group, and what's in store for her and the group in 2025. Anouk, this is an extra big pleasure for me, given that we work together now and are business partners, and I've had the great pleasure of working alongside you the last few months. So I'm super excited for our audience to hear all about what we've been up to. But how are you doing today?
Hi, James. Thank you. I'm really well. Excited to be back. Well, you know that I adore you and I've loved chatting to you before, and having you as part of the team now, and the JBM team is just phenomenal. So really well.
Oh, good stuff. And the feeling is very mutual. Maybe some people have heard your previous episode, but we probably have some new listeners. So do you mind sharing a bit more about Unleashed, the origin story, and kind of the work you've done over the years, just for those that maybe don't know you as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And stop me if I ramble too much, because I can talk about Unleashed forever. Unleashed and what we do, and you're right, since we last spoke, has actually changed quite a fair bit. The origin story goes back to 2017, where I was working in a Series B startup in London as their chief people officer. I had a large kind of network of people that I was close to, that were all working in similar businesses and were facing really similar problems. Back at the time, 2017, so this is pre-COVID, so completely different lifetime and completely different market, but businesses wanted to scale really quickly, and it was all about growth at all costs at the time. That has changed a bit, and I can come to that later, but definitely then growth at all costs. So the focus, rightly so, when you're a founder of an early stage business, is getting the product development sorted and then going to market and making sure you can kind of nail revenue sales. People and culture as a result, and it could be for reasons of capacity or capability, was never kind of a top priority. And it shouldn't be at that early stage, mind you. But the problem was that it wasn't thought about until lots of symptomatic problems started arising around, how do I progress? How do I get a pay rise? I'm not involved in communication anymore. Someone's been brought up above me. My role's becoming more specialist. I used to be a generalist. Why was this decision made? I'm not quite aware. So all of these little things started to bubble away. And founders, in order to try and kind of fix them quickly, would kind of plaster over them and kind of treat the symptoms rather than the causes. Again, no blame, because there is a real capacity and the capability issue there. But I just knew it could be different if businesses started thinking about people and culture earlier. Hence why I created Unleashed. And the idea was to work with early stage businesses to take the people and culture strategy and to align that completely intertwined with their business strategy, so that they could achieve what they wanted without slowing down to address problems that are going to come down the road. Most businesses have the same problems. It's the solutions that need to be different, because you have different culture, different people, different leaders, different products, and different plans. So that's the origin story of Unleashed. And we've worked to date, well, not to date, up until around 2022, with around 150 brilliant different startups and scaling businesses. And now part of, alongside you and the JBM team, and as part of Amplified and Foundation Partners, that's grown to almost 300. So quite a ride.
Amazing. I should probably say, look, I was first introduced to it a fair few years ago, and it was off the back of just so many clients I'd spoken to, just like raving about you and the great work Unleashed does. And I always loved your branding and just like the style. And so for me to be able to be now working with you is a real treat. And I know that you've been to some amazing times, also challenging times, like all sort of business services companies, professional services companies have in the last few crazy years. And I know that you ended up being acquired by Foundation Partners, and now that we've created Amplified Group. So I'd love to tell our listeners a bit about that story. Like, how did Unleashed become acquired in the end? And what was it about Andrew, who's been on the podcast, and Andy Meikle and Foundation Partners? What was it about them and the proposition that kind of convinced you to go for it?
Yeah, well, 2022 happened. So during COVID and lockdown 2021, we were thriving. We did really, really well because we were supporting businesses to support their people. And it was a time where everybody needed that as a service. Then 2022 came along. There was the invasion of Ukraine, resulting in energy crisis, inflationary increases, interest rate increases, and a huge drop as a result in VC money being invested as it was prior to that stage. And there were loads of redundancies and restructures. So the market really shifted from a growth at all costs, as I kind of mentioned before, to businesses needing to do more with a lot less. And as a business who supports businesses and who's a service provider, for the want of any better term, we were the first off the list because they needed, and rightly so, to prioritize permanent employees. We weren't ready for the market change. We've got to say, we thought, like many businesses, that the growth that we saw, and there was the term, I hated that term. Do you remember the term that was used during COVID all the time of the new normal? I couldn't stand it. But as a business, we felt like what we were experiencing then was going to be the continued trajectory. But actually, it wasn't. And like every pendulum, when something goes one way, it always swings back the other way before it rests somewhere in the middle. Because our focus was always about supporting growth, we were structured that way internally, meaning that operating models stopped aligning with the needs of the businesses when things started to change. Our internal ways of working weren't quite right, and we weren't making decisions or moving fast enough to be able to adapt how we worked. So we, like our clients in 2022, needed to make some redundancies, and then again in 2023. And it was really our lack of ability to change with the market forces that meant that we were heading into the red at a really rapid pace, actually. So I reached out to a group of founders that I know. And one thing I would always recommend if you're a founder, be part of a founder group because it's so helpful when you need them. But in any case, I reached out to this group of founders that I was quite close to. And at the time, actually, it was about inquiring around going into administration and what that would mean and the impact of that, because we were headed into the red and I wasn't clear what we would need to do or the impact. And actually, Andrew, who happened to be part of this founder group, reached out to me. He'd not long decided to start a similar business, which at the time, and it still is Foundation Partners. And he recognized that Unleashed had a great brand. We had incredible clients. We had a brilliant pipeline as well, phenomenal team. And that I had so many learnings that I could bring to the table where he and Andy, Meikle, business partners, they hadn't had that experience that I had. So he said, why don't we consider acquiring you? And I was like, acquisition? This had not crossed my mind. As a business who was starting to lose money, why would anyone want to acquire us? But it was those kind of reasons that I just mentioned that he was interested. To answer the part of your question in terms of what sealed the deal, I'd say there were push and pull factors as part of that. Push factors, mainly that I wanted to look after the team or making people redundant. I didn't want to go into administration. I wanted to be able to pay everybody their notice periods and look after the team on the way out who'd worked so hard to make Unleashed a successful at the time business. And I also couldn't have sold Unleashed to anyone. So the pull factors being very much those clearly values aligned, or Andrew and Andy were clearly values aligned with me. They wanted to keep the Unleashed brand alive as well, although it'd be, under different ownership. And the IP and everything that we had built over 7 years would get to carry on. And that felt really important. Also, I felt really ambitious. I still wanted to be successful. I wanted to be more successful than we had been. And I knew that Andrew and Andy were the people that could really happen with. So I was really excited to look into that and then to be acquired not long later. In fact, it'll be in 2 days' time. It'll be exactly a year since Unleashed was acquired.
Wow, it's incredible. And thank you so much for being so honest. I think there will be a lot of people listening to this, and I'm one of them who wasn't prepared for the drastic turn of the market and had to make difficult decisions and found that period of time really challenging. And I know a lot of people did. And I think it's really important to just to talk about it. And it's great to see that from what was a potentially really horrible situation for you to be a year forward now, having had this amazing year under this sort of new setup, but still with all the ambition and the enthusiasm you have for what you do. Like, it's been amazing to see. You're now a year into that, and we've joined the ranks since JDM. How have you found the past 12 months, sort of creating Amplified Group, but also bedding in Unleashed into that? How have you found that personally and professionally? And what have been some of your biggest lessons and highlights from the last year?
Yeah, good question. First of all, I find it hard to differentiate between the personally and the professionally because they're so deeply intertwined. It's been a phenomenal year. I think it's exceeded all of my expectations. It's been really exciting. It's been rejuvenating. It's been motivating. It has been unbelievably busy, but that is a good thing. But it's not been easy. We work very differently to how we worked at Unleashed, but that's very much out of necessity. If we were creating the same thing, then we'd potentially be in trouble again. So we're taking the lessons from that. But it does take working differently, just takes a while to get used to. And it was literally kind of one day to the next that transition was made. It's been really interesting because the acquisition of Unleashed came with 7 years worth of work and experience, which meant that foundation partners could immediately kind of benefit from that rather than take 7 years to build what we had built. So immediately it was very busy and immediately it was very fast paced. So in one way, we're kind of very experienced business in terms of the work, but how we do it is very nascent. So there's a lot of experimenting and exploring, which I love. And what I mean by that is how we do it internally, what our operating structure is like. The biggest learnings are centered around one, acceptance that you don't always get things right, and you kind of have to over time forgive yourself that you did the best that you could at the time that you did it. That's still something that I'm learning because I think it's very hard. James, you and I are very similar in terms of being real people and wanting to make sure everybody's happy, and it's kind of really understanding that isn't possible and how to deal with that when you kind of internally feel a little bit conflicted. That's a huge lesson. That being a partner rather than a solo founder, or being part of a team rather than a solo founder, is so much easier. All the decisions are shared, the good, the bad, and you can discuss things really openly with other people versus versus everything ruminating inside your own head and you starting to get yourself into a little black hole. So I hope you've been finding that as well. It's certainly something that I found. And that also a shift in mindset and how you work will get you a different result. So I know it sounds obvious, but it's really easy to get caught up in just because something worked previously in one way, to then keep on trying and keep on trying the same way. Actually, once it stopped working, it's not going to start working again. And you have to change how you work and what you do to get that different result. It doesn't just happen. Performance is definitely an outcome, but how you operate, how you communicate, how you make decisions, how you deal with change, your attitude and your mindset is what actually gets you to the right result in time. So that also was a big learning. Highlights wise, you and the JBM team joining Amplified was just phenomenal. And I think we've known each other for a long time. We've known that we're kind of very values aligned. We've both appreciated each other and the work that we've done and the teams that we've built, and being able to come together to properly work together, not just to recommend or do referrals here or there. It's just been phenomenal. Growing the team as well. When at the very beginning of 2023, there were 4 of us. And now, in addition to some freelancers, there's 24 of us, including, some freelancers working with us. So that's been incredible to be able to grow the team over the last year. And of course, like when I started Unleashed, it was all about supporting businesses to kind of thrive and to perform and to grow. And the fact that we can still do that and we're doing it with more businesses than we've ever done before is also a major highlight for me.
Love it. I mean, so many great things, and I'm very touched. You said about JBM, but for me, it's just been it was a daunting thing to go all in on this after 12 years of solo founder life. But it's the best thing I've professionally done, and I'm absolutely loving it. It's been a steep learning curve in many ways. Like as you said, you have to adapt and change, and there's lots to do and think about. But actually, the power of the group of those brands and those people, and the alignment in terms of mission and values It's really, really powerful. And I think we're already seeing that, which is great just for our clients and the benefit for the team. We could easily have a love in and just keep doing this, but I'm going to stop myself because there's much more we want to share about the great work Anish does, exciting things from her coming out of that. I think will benefit a lot more our audience. So Anish has evolved a lot. So what does Anish do today, and how are you working now with businesses and individuals?
Yeah, great question, because you're right. We've definitely pivoted, I guess you would call it. And currently our website's getting a major revamp. So that's not even accurate in terms of what it is that we're doing. But for context, what we started doing, that kind of fractional strategy and people operations piece, is now what Foundation Partners focuses on. So for those listeners that aren't quite aware, Amplified Group is made up of Unleashed, Foundation Partners who do the fractional people and culture work, and of course JBM, who do the exec search side of things as well for clients. Unleashed, still true to its roots, is now very much still focused on performance, but is looking at that through the lens of the performance of its leaders rather than the overarching people and culture strategy work. So we know that the most impactful lever for a business's success is the performance of its leaders and managers, which is why we now focus on supercharging leaders to cultivate high-performing teams and drive business success. And we kind of do that by making sure we harness the power of community learning. So we deliver group coaching and leadership development programs that emphasize live challenges rather than theoretical challenges and bring in real-world experiences and peer collaboration. What this means is that the approach is very much kind of beyond digital learning. We will do virtual sessions. Obviously, we do a lot of virtual work, but it's not isolated digital learning. So we make sure that people foster meaningful relationships, which creates lasting behavioral change because people feel a sense of accountability. And that's where a lot of leadership development goes wrong, where people are focused on, I'm going to increase my knowledge, I'm going to increase my skills, but they forget about changing the behavior that has the impact as a result of that. And that's where the focus of our programs is. To date, most of our programs have been delivered to businesses with what we call closed cohorts. So it's an internal team of managers and leaders from the one business, and we deliver our leadership development program or coaching or our 360 leadership reviews, whatever it might be. In September, we launched our open cohorts, which is with different leaders from different businesses coming together and being able to share their experiences as well. And that's been a massive success for us, in addition to the fact that we're accredited by the Institute of Leadership, which means that everyone gets a certificate and becomes a member of the Institute of Leadership and gets an accreditation, which is really great as well. But those open cohorts has meant that people with unique experiences can come together and share learnings and share what has worked and what hasn't worked within their businesses. So it means that people on that program can take so much more back to their business as well. So that's been really super exciting for us in the last year.
That's so awesome. And I know the next open cohort for Lee is in January. So do you mind sharing a bit about what that actually looks like practically? Who's it for? Why our listeners should consider signing up?
Yeah. So we've got 3 open cohorts launching end of January, early February. They're up for a maximum of 12 leaders per session, which is really important so that everyone can get involved within the sessions. It's not a stand back and listen type group. There's 7 sessions over 14 weeks, and they are based, as I kind of mentioned before, on high-performing behaviors of high-performing leaders. So it focuses on self-awareness, strategic communication, decision-making, trust, driving change, developing teams, psychological safety, influencing and motivating, enabling innovation, and managing conflict, and so on. So there's a lot that's involved, but they're all kind of behavioral sides of things. As I mentioned, we don't really focus on theory and concepts too much. We bring in some different things, but it's all about how we can help leaders apply real world challenges to those concepts. And we create a community of leaders as part of that. And so they can work together and explore different ways of solving for challenges. As far for who it is, it can be for anyone. So have founders, C-suite leaders on the program. We have experienced heads of VPs of people or directors. And we also have new and emerging leaders. We do group the sessions with intention so that we can make sure that people are going to benefit from the experience really well. So often we'll have groups of founders together or groups of directors together, new leaders together as well, to make sure that everyone's getting the benefit of the program.
Love it. What a great way to start the year. I thoroughly encourage people listening to sign up or at least check it out. And I've seen lots of the testimonials online and really positive response to it. And it's great to hear that we continue into 2025. And what results have you seen from the participants that have actually got involved in open cohorts? And are there any testimonials or anything that you'd want to share with our listeners who might be on the fence about whether they should sign up?
Who might be on the fence about whether they should sign up? Well, particularly for the open cohorts, it's often a budgeting thing. Will my company pay for me to go on the program? It's not an expensive program if you think of what you get and the impact, but there is still, companies are still being really cautious with budgets around learning, which is why I think that we need to be very mindful that this is an investment in the performance of the leaders, and the performance of the leaders has a huge impact on the performance of the people and directly linked then to the performance of the company. The results have been amazing in terms of what people have said about the program. Our average score, and I hate kind of talking like this, it makes me feel a little bit embarrassed, but our average score has been kind of 4.5 out of 5, stars, if you like, which has been fantastic. And people constantly say things like it's exceeding expectations. I'm able to take this back at work. My team have felt the impact of what I have done. I'm able to apply my knowledge. And we've seen, especially where we have delivered either for individuals on an open cohort or for teams on a closed cohort, where we've been able to do a 360 review of the leaders, deliver the program, and then follow that up with some individual coaching. We've heard back from founders and CEOs some kind of incredible feedback about the difference that they feel that that's made to the team and to the company, particularly in how the leadership team itself works together, whereas often it's, as an individual leader, I'm going to be accountable for a functional area. Actually, to perform really well as a leader, you have to be able to lead across the whole business. And that's the big change that a lot of businesses see, is how a leadership team works together rather than just thinking about their own space.
Love it. Thank you. And looking ahead, what do you think leaders should be thinking about when it comes to building high performing teams and cultures in 2025?
So this one's actually really tricky to answer because it depends what the company wants to achieve. And again, I know that sounds quite silly, but I think rather than like a push trend coming up, the trend is actually what we need as a business is going to be different to what another business needs. And therefore, we need to define what we want and what high performance is. Now, whether that's defining high performance culture, whether that's defining high performance leadership team, or whether that's defining a high performance individual, it has to be defined first, because once it's defined, you can then act upon it and then you can measure it. So looking, for example, if we're thinking about a high performing leadership team, what does that mean to an individual business? Will mean something different to one business as it will to a different business. But if you define that first, you can then create what you need. So you need to be clear on the expectations. So you can do a 360, for example, on the leadership team, understand what skills need to be developed, where people are strong, create personal development plans, be very much self-aware. I think the self-awareness piece is the critical piece. And that's, our program starts with self-awareness as number one, because you have to understand that gap from where you're expected to be, where you are, in order for you to be able to progress along that. And given we know that the world is continuously changing, I mean, if you think of where we are at the moment, kind of on this precipice of all of these global things that are happening, what can happen next, we don't know. So as a leader, your ability to communicate well and to be able to lead where there is a lot of change, and some of it could be is really important. And communicating well is unfortunately not as easy as it sounds.
So true. Thank you for sharing that. And I guess our final two questions. Are there any trends, 60 trends or predictions that you would like to share with our listeners today?
My number one piece of advice at the moment, and that we are actually also seeing as a trend, is to get away from isolated skill development from short form digital content. I did kind of allude to this a little bit earlier, and there are some great digital learning providers, so this is not me putting them down. But to develop high performance as a leader, it's not just about the knowledge or the skills that you might learn, it's about how you work with others. So you need to learn with others as well. So getting into a room, whether that's virtual or otherwise, with other people and learning together, I think is going to be far more popular in 2025 as it should be in 2026 and beyond than isolated digital learning content. It's more expensive, which is why I think people haven't been willing to do it. But the impact is so significantly different to a 1 hour internet session, digital content session on feedback, for example, that it's definitely worth the difference there. So that's the big thing I'm seeing and will continue to see.
I am equally pumped, and I'm so glad that we can share this, your updates and just sort of what you've been through for the last couple of years, both the ups and the downs. But it's great to see Unleashed thriving. It's great to see Amplify thriving. It's obviously I'm very biased, but that's a wonderful thing for me and for everyone involved. And yeah, it does feel like 2025 can be a great year for the group, but also more broadly, because I think there's a real shift in sentiment, and it feels like things are on the up. So hopefully that will continue for the long term. Well, thanks, Annette. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time, and it's always lovely to see you. So thank you for sharing your being a Where Are They Now guest. Cheers.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. I really hope that you found it useful and inspiring. If we have left any questions unanswered, or if you have any feedback or guest recommendations for future series, then please make sure you get in touch on info@jbmc.co.uk. I often get asked by listeners how you can help us spread the word about 40 Minute Mentor. There are two simple ways you can help. Firstly, share this episode on your preferred social media platform, and LinkedIn is probably where I'm most likely to see it. And you can also leave us a review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Every share on social media and review left on the podcast platforms really helps us to get 40 Minute Mentor in front of new audiences and share the power of mentorship even further. Thank you so much for your ongoing support, and I look forward to seeing you again next Wednesday for even more pocket-sized mentorship.